past few years now, actually, I think it's been, I have been interviewing people, actors, performers, people from all different areas and roles within the creative industries on this channel. And it's only when people started asking me for advice and about how I make my podcast that I realised that actually it sort of is a podcast in many ways. I sort of didn't really think that through, but I feel like I've been making this series for a while now, and lots of people have questions about how I film it, how I recruit such cool, interesting guests, how I plan it, how I research, how I do my questions, how I edit it, everyone's got a lot of different questions because loads of people want to make podcasts and want to know how I approach things. And if you want to stay tuned and support my interviews and see my interviews, then please do subscribe, because that would really help me out. And let's chat about, I guess, the beginnings of it. So basically, I used to go to a lot of different industry talks with various different people across the creative industries, and I feel like through doing that I started to think about what I valued in certain talks, what I wish there was more of in talks. Like, I feel like some talks as well are just loads of fun anecdotes, but I also wanted to have some actionable advice, and I thought, instead of just thinking about that, I just create that myself. So that is what I have done, and I choose my guests. I try to choose them wisely, because I think I've been to panels before where everyone on the panel is London based, grew up in London, and then people from outside of London ask questions about how to be an actor outside of London, and they're like, move to London, you can't deny what opportunities there are in London, and that's not accessible for everyone. So I wanted everyone to feel represented and everyone to feel seen, and I wanted to create a platform where lots of different people could see potential versions of themselves, and it can be an opportunity where people can get advice and also see where they could go and where they could be in the industry in the future. And I want to make it feel like the industry can be open for lots of different people and guide everyone. And I pick guests based on people who inspire me, people who I've been aware of their work for a while. Like, some people are on my list for months and months and months until I gain the courage to ask them. I feel like it's important as well that I've seen work that they've done, and also that the rest of their sort of body of work is accessible, so I can feel like I've researched them well enough that I'm informed enough to interview them. Because I feel like sometimes you see interviews and you're like, you actually don't know anything about this person, you've never seen them in a show before, you've never seen anything they've done. And I feel like I wanted to be aware of them, aware of every typical question they tend to be asked, aware of every single question they've been asked before in an interview, so then all of my questions are entirely new to them. And people also ask about how I structure my messages in order to invite people, because that's a complicated thing, and a thing that I feel like I've got into a pattern of feeling more confident with in how I want to approach it. So I filmed a little clip that I can insert here of me drafting a message. So I've got a laptop right here, and I thought I'd take you through how I go about inviting my guests and wording things, because I feel like the wording of things and the scheduling of things was an unexpected challenge when I first started, because people would reply to me and I'd be like, what do I say now? And it's quite scary, because I feel like I wasn't just that used to organising stuff, so I feel like negotiating with new people and finding times and informing them about the series and what it's about was scary. So I thought I'd talk you through how I word stuff. So I think it's important to not write it too long, but make sure you have all the information in there. So I feel like some of the important elements are to make sure it feels personal, because I feel like I always do research on possible guests to invite before I invite them, just so I can say these are the topics that I would like to ask you about. So they feel like it's not just a generic thing I'm sending out to everyone, but it's a very specific thing to them. And I always look over previous emails that I've sent out in the past as well, so I've got some of the information here that I can use in this new invite, because I think there's certain things that it's always important to inform them of. Like, I think something that is always important to say is, say, I filmed this over Zoom, this is how long it will take no more than 30 minutes of your time, I say, and these are the kind of things that I want to ask you about. Here's a link to previous interviews. I have a playlist of all the previous interviews as well, because people will often be like, do you have any information about what you actually do? What interviews are there? So I have that, and I make sure to express how okay it is for them to say no, because I know that I'm just asking them, but like, I don't know who they are. They might feel really guilty, so I make sure to say that there's no pressure and feel free to say no. And also, they are busy people. There isn't any rush to schedule, because lots of people ask like, when does this need to be done by? And I used to do interviews monthly, but now not so much, because it's just got harder to get guests. I don't know why, but I feel like making sure they know what the expectations are, that like there's no time limit on it. Like sometimes I wait a few months until guests are free. Introduce myself and the concept and how I'm trying to increase accessibility to the industry, and I also list some people who are sort of similar kind of genre of guests to them, so they can get an idea of who's been on the series. So that's how I write my messages to my guests, and it's actually surprised me that I've got guests that I never ever thought would be possible to get, because I guess as well, sometimes when people are more experienced in the industry, they've done more press, PR, talks, interviews, podcasts, so they sort of know what it is. So that's something that surprised me throughout doing this, is that actually some of the people who are most up for doing this kind of thing are people with a bigger public profile who have done lots of this kind of thing before, or who are more established in the industry because they feel more confident in themselves, whereas other people might feel less comfortable. But I feel like a lot of people say yes. Like, you'd be surprised how many people say yes, and I feel like it's been a good lesson for me in the fact that like sometimes you can just see opportunities and apply for the opportunities, but actually there are so many opportunities that aren't advertised that like you can take advantage of. Like, lots of people in the industry are willing to help you, and I think it's such a beautiful thing, and I'm so blessed to have had the conversations that I've had, and I've built such interesting connections. People have been so generous with me, and I've learned so much from my guests. A few of my guests I have then gone on to work with or meet, and being able to speak to people who really inspire me in the industry is just so valuable, and I feel like I didn't realise the extent of how much I'd gained from it until I did it. And then I think it's respectful to do a lot of research, because you're asking for their time. So I do so much research. I watch everything I can, I read everything I can. All of the really interesting topics that I'm like, oh, that's quite interesting, I then make a bullet pointed note of all of these different interesting things. Like, oh, it's interesting that they do headshot photography, so I'll put that on a list, and then from the list of topics that really interested me, or things that they've talked about that are really interesting, I then formulate questions based on stuff that they've not really publicly talked about before, and I group my topics into I can't speak. I group my questions into topics, and then I place them on post-it notes on my screen, so that when I do the interview, I'm not trying to remember all of these questions, because I think some people, like Amelia Zimoldenberg, I think, in Chicken Shop Date, when she's on the red carpet interviews that she does, she memorizes all of these questions and all of these information about all of the people, and I think that has a time and place. But I think sometimes I was getting stressed when I initially tried to memorize all the information in my interviews, so I feel like to combat that, I just thought it's useful to have it post-it notes on the screen, so I'm not really massively looking away, but then I'm just more in the moment, because I'm not just trying to remember stuff, and I'm not getting stressed out about that. What I do when I first get my guests on the call is I check in with them, because I feel like the call etiquette can feel a bit scary initially, because you're like, I've got this industry person who's giving me their time, and I need to make them feel like it's worthwhile and that I'm not wasting their time. So what I do now is I check in with them, I ask them if they have any questions, I ask them how they are, and then I do my thumbnails first, and I get them to choreograph it themselves. So some people are like, and some people are like, basically, I just feel like it sort of breaks the ice, and it's a nice opportunity to be able to talk with your guest, check the vibe of the guest, and just make sure that the thumbnail is something that they'll be comfortable with being an image of them on the internet. So that's something that I do. And also in advance as well, some guests will want a list of questions, and some of the guests will also write their whole answers in advance. But I feel like that's quite rare. Most people just want to have a chat, and I explain to people that it's just a chat and the conversation can go wherever they want it to go. I have some questions, but we can also go off topic and talk about some stuff that might be really interesting that comes up. Like in my first interview, I was speaking to Zoe, and Zoe was talking about being a northerner doing Shakespeare and the kind of discrimination, I guess, that you can be faced through that, because lots of people have this idea of this Shakespeare voice that you have to have in order to be able to do Shakespeare, when really you should be able to use your accent yourself. And hearing about the experiences of being a northern actor, I think, is useful. But then I do the thumbnail, and then after that, very quickly after that really, we start the interview. I just check that they're okay to start, and I ask all of my questions, and I feel like my approach has changed within that, because I used to have people on this channel to have chats with, but then that felt like a chat interview sort of, because like accidentally, like I am sort of the host of this channel, so it was sort of me leading the direction and the questions. So I then moved more into doing these strict interviews, and I was asking the questions and providing a platform to people, but then I think also something that makes it feel more like a conversation is making sure that you transition well between the topics and the questions, and making sure that you put them in an order that feels like an actual conversation and flows, like having them thematically linked, thinking about how they link from one to the other, and sometimes moving them around as well. If you get to the end of an answer and you feel like another question makes more sense, then improv it out and do that question instead. And I think asking follow-up questions as well when you listen to an answer and there's something else that you want to ask based on that is interesting, and something I do. And I also start to talk a bit more about myself and engage myself more in the conversation as well, because my friends watched my interviews as well, and they were like, it would be nice to hear you talk as well, so it feels like more of a conversation and not just someone's talking, but like there's more of a back and forth to it. But something that is important to remember if you are interviewing people is a big mistake that I see a lot of people do, or when people have handed me their footage to edit when they've been interviewing people, is that they're often like, yeah, all throughout the answer, and they're like, okay, yeah, I see. And if you're doing that, that's going to mess with the audio. Like, you jumping in means that you can't sort of take a clip of it if you wanted to use a clip and promote it on like your TikTok, Instagram, on your story, on YouTube Shorts, which I could do, but I just haven't really done yet. But you're sort of interrupting the flow, interrupting the audio. Like sometimes I record over Zoom because I think that's just the most accessible for people, because I'm working with people who are very busy. So being able to say it's online, like that's the least hassle, so then people are more likely to say yes. And I don't have a studio. I could get free studio space, but then asking people to travel over is just a lot of money and a lot of their time, and I feel like that would be a higher production value, but I'm not paying my guests, so I don't feel like that's really fair. And also then you'd realise which guests I live closer to and which guests live further away, and from a personal security point of view that is not good. And linking to all of their work in the description is really important to be able to give them as much of a platform here as I can, because they're giving me their time, but I can give them a platform to their work, which I obviously think is good, because I'm very selective with my guests. I'm very picky with who I ask. And over time, I feel like I've got so much more comfortable with the interview technique. So I feel like it's just practice in flowing between the questions and not feeling like you just need to rush on to the next question straight away. But like you can talk a bit about the previous answer, talk about the next question, talk about your own experience related to that, because then it just feels a lot more natural and a lot more engaging. And also, I allow my guests to be able to watch the interviews and check it afterwards if they like. And it's always interesting to watch the conversation back, because it is weird watching you have a conversation with someone else. But I feel like it's made me realise that some moments that I thought were like me struggling to make the interview flow or whatever, struggling to connect certain questions, actually don't always read like that on camera. Like, actually sometimes you surprise yourself and actually it's fine. So I feel like don't be too in your head about that and just like relax a bit more, because actually often it looks different in the edit to how it felt in the moment. So I feel like that's what I've learned, but also being aware when you're recording on a video call about your volume and their volume, because they could be massively different. So sometimes I've had to split the footage and adjust their volume in the parts where they're talking, adjust my volume when I'm talking, in order to make us on the same level. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, I was spending ages when I did my first interview on my first edit to decide how I wanted to structure it and to make the edit be what I wanted to be. And I decided that personally, some people do it all in one take. They do just like one take of an interview and that's the edit. But I felt like it would be too awkward to try and introduce someone while they're just sat there for ages. I feel like that might make them, maybe it would make them more comfortable. Like, some people then feel really built up by the introduction, but I feel like I don't like to leave people waiting, and I've got a strict time schedule. So I get into the questions and then I introduce them before, and then that's informed by the conversation that I've had, and I can be like, this is what's coming up on my interview. I do a conclusion at the end to really direct the people towards the lessons I've learned, what I've taken away from the conversation, and also where you can find the guest and the guest's work, and really just promote it even more. And I feel like that makes a nicer edit for the guests to watch back, and it also feels more finished and polished for me personally. But then I think also there is a skill to being able to do the introduction and the conclusion while the guest is there, but it's just not something that I would like to do at this point in time, to be honest. That's how I sort of formulate my interviews. And something people asked me at the time as well, for example with Adele James, she was Cleopatra on Netflix's Queen Cleopatra, so people were like, how did you get her to do an interview when she was on such a big project? And I think firstly, she's very generous with the time and effort she puts into working with actors. I think that's a passion of hers, so all credit to her. However, actually I had no idea at the time of asking her that that was a project that she was then going to announce and be part of. So like, you never know what your guests are going to go on to do, and those things might be announced before you film, and then you might end up having something else to then go research and look into that you weren't expecting before, which I think is so fun, because people are active in the industry and they're doing so many cool things. And if anyone has any questions, because I don't know if I've answered everything that people would want to know, if people have questions, then leave them in the comments and I will get back to you. And as with everything, like, I'm always working on trying to improve this as well. So I guess if you have any feedback for my interview series, then please do leave that in the comments. I just thought that some people ask me about how I get my guests, how I film it, how I approach it, how I got into it, so I thought I'd answer that. But there's always stuff that I could be learning as well. So let's have a chat about this topic in the comments, and I hope that this has been helpful in some kind of way for people who are interested in doing this kind of thing. And thank you so much for giving me your time and watching this. Thank you. Bye.